Before we begin, I want to share a piece of my story with you. You might see me as just an old man, someone with more yesterdays than tomorrows. And for a while, I started to see myself that way too. My name is Robert, I'm 77 years old, and this is the story of how my own family tried to erase me and how my granddaughter gave me the tools to write my own ending. It's a story about betrayal, but it's also a story about the surprising power of a quiet man with nothing left to lose. It wasn't about revenge when it started. But by the end, well, let's just say justice has a way of feeling an awful lot like it. It all started, as these things so often do, with quiet little changes. My wife, Eleanor, had been gone for 3 years, and the silence in the house we built together had become a physical presence. It was a big house for one man, full of her echoes, the scent of lavender that still clung to the linen closet, the worn spot on the armchair where she'd read thousands of books. At first, my daughter Sarah and her husband Mark were wonderful. They'd call every day, bring over groceries I didn't need, and fuss over me with a kind of dutiful intensity. "Dad, you shouldn't be climbing ladders. Dad, let Mark handle the lawn. Dad, are you eating enough?" I appreciated it, I truly did. It felt like love. It felt like they were trying to fill the vast Eleanor-shaped hole in our lives. But slowly, the texture of that help began to change. The key I gave them for emergencies started to be used for surprise inspections. I'd be in my workshop, sanding a piece of maple, lost in the familiar rasp and the sweet smell of the wood, and Sarah would just appear at the door, her face a mask of strained concern. "Dad," I called 3 times. I was worried. The calls I missed were the ones that came while I was napping, or out in the garden where the reception was spotty. Soon, she suggested I leave my phone in the kitchen, just so we always know where it is. It was a small thing, but it felt like the first bar in a cage I didn't see being built. Then they started screening my calls. My old friend from the union, Arthur, called me one afternoon. I saw his name flash on the screen and reached for the phone, but Sarah, who was over for one of her visits, picked it up first. "Oh, hello, Arthur," she said, her voice dripping with a sickly sweetness. "Dad's not feeling up to talking right now. He's been very confused lately. I'll be sure to tell him you called." She hung up and turned to me, smiling. "Arthur sends his love. You know how he can talk, Dad. You need your rest." I opened my mouth to protest. I felt perfectly fine, eager to catch up with my old friend. But the look in her eye was hard, unyielding. It was the look of a person who has already made a decision for you. So I just nodded. What was I supposed to do? Argue? 'Cause a scene? It was easier to just let it go. That became my mantra, just let it go. The unwell and confused narrative became their go-to explanation for everything. When I forgot to bring in the recycling bins one week, I was showing signs of cognitive decline. When I told a long story about my time in the service, a story I'd told 100 times, Mark would pat my arm and say, "That's a great story, Robert, even if you're mixing up the dates a little." They weren't just my caretakers anymore. They were my curators, managing the exhibition of my life for an audience of their friends and our relatives, editing out the parts that suggested I was still a capable, independent man. They were turning me into a ghost in my own home, a gentle, harmless specter they could pat on the head and manage. The isolation was the worst part. Friends stopped calling because they were always told I was resting. Neighbors who used to pop by for a chat were met at the door by Sarah or Mark with polite, firm dismissals. "He had a bit of a fall, we're trying to keep him quiet." I hadn't had a fall, I was lonely. I would sit in my workshop for hours, not even working, just holding a piece of wood, feeling the grain, and trying to remember the man who had the strength to build this house with his own 2 hands. He felt like a stranger to me now. Then, one sunny Tuesday, a little bit of light broke through the gray. My granddaughter, Chloe, came to visit. She was 16, a whip-smart kid with observant eyes and a quiet intensity that reminded me so much of Eleanor. She always seemed to have a camera or her phone in her hand, not out of teenage distraction, but out of genuine curiosity, framing the world, capturing moments. She found me in the garden, trying to coax some life into Eleanor's prize-winning roses. She gave me a hug, a real one, not the careful, fragile embrace her parents gave me. "Grandpa," she said, her voice bright with an idea. "For my media studies class we have to make a documentary. A short film about a person who inspires us. I was wondering, could I make it about you?" I felt a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. In a world where I was being made to feel invisible, my granddaughter saw me. She thought I was inspiring. It was the first time in a long time I felt like more than just a collection of symptoms and responsibilities. A documentary about me. I chuckled. "I don't know, Chloe. It'd be a pretty boring film. An old man, some wood, and a bunch of wilting roses." "No, it won't be," she insisted, her eyes shining. "I want to hear all the stories, about how you met Grandma, about building this house, about your workshop, everything. It'll be a tribute." A tribute. The word resonated deep within me. Sarah and Mark were building a narrative of my decline. Chloe wanted to build a tribute to my life. I couldn't say no. I thought it was just a sweet gesture, a school project born from the kind heart of a girl who still saw her grandfather as a hero. I had no idea that her little camera was about to become my weapon, my witness, and my salvation. I didn't know that her school project was the first step in a plan that would burn my daughter's world to the ground. The first few filming sessions were a genuine joy. Chloe would set up her camera on a tripod in the living room or my workshop, and she'd just ask questions. They weren't the condescending questions her mother asked, like, "Did you remember to take your pills, Dad?" They were real questions. "Grandpa, tell me about the first piece of furniture you ever built. What was the scariest part of starting your own carpentry business? What did you think the first time you saw Grandma?" I found myself opening up in a way I hadn't in years. The stories which Mark and Sarah had dismissed as the ramblings of an old man came pouring out of me, crisp and clear. I told her about saving for years to buy this plot of land, how it was just a field of weeds and dreams back then. I described the day Eleanor and I stood here, hand in hand, looking at the architectural plans I'd drawn myself on our kitchen table. I could almost smell the sawdust and feel the satisfying ache in my muscles as I recounted raising the first wall of the frame, how our neighbors thought we were crazy to do it ourselves. "This house isn't just wood and nails, Chloe," I told her, my voice thick with emotion as her camera rolled. "Every floorboard, every window frame has a story. This scratch on the floor here?" I pointed to a deep gouge near the fireplace. "That's where your mother dropped a cast iron skillet when she was trying to make me breakfast in bed for my 40th birthday. She cried for an hour." I told her it was my favorite part of the floor because it meant she was here. I talked about Eleanor, about her laugh that could fill this whole house, about her fierce intelligence and her unwavering belief in me. I relived the lean years when my business was struggling and how she took a night job just to make ends meet, never once complaining. I explained how when things finally turned around, the first thing we did wasn't to buy a fancy car or go on a lavish vacation. It was to set up a college fund for Sarah. Everything we did, everything we built, was for her. Chloe listened, rapt. She wasn't just recording, she was absorbing it, understanding the foundation upon which her own life had been built. During one of these sessions, I pulled out my old ledgers from the business. I wanted to show her the tangible proof of our hard work. "Look at this," I said, pointing to an entry from 1995. "That was the year your mother wanted that big fancy wedding. We didn't have the money, not really. But your grandmother said, 'Rob, it's her one day. We'll make it work.' So we cashed in some bonds we were saving for our own retirement. We never told her that." I showed her another entry, a decade later, a significant withdrawal. "And this," I said, my voice quieter now. "This was when Mark's brilliant tech startup went belly up. He was going to lose everything, declare bankruptcy. Your mother came to us in tears. So, we took out a second mortgage on this house that was completely paid off. We gave them the money to clear their debts. They called it a loan. But Eleanor and I knew we'd never see a dime of it back, and we didn't care. She was our daughter. It wasn't about keeping score. I never thought of it that way. It was just what you did for family. You sacrificed, you supported, you gave. I'd spent a lifetime being the provider, the safety net, the strong foundation. It was a promise I had made to Eleanor on her deathbed. "Take care of our girl, Rob," she had whispered, her hand frail in mine. "She's not as strong as she thinks she is." I thought my quiet support was me keeping that promise. I see now that what I was doing wasn't support. It was enabling. I was so focused on being the strong foundation that I didn't realize they were systematically trying to dynamite it out from under me. The turning point, the moment the sweet school project curdled into something else entirely, happened on a Thursday. Chloe had been filming in the kitchen. She was asking me about Eleanor's recipes, and I was showing her the old food-stained index cards. Chloe's phone rang, a friend from school, and she stepped out onto the back porch to take the call, leaving her main camera on its tripod, pointed at the kitchen counter. The little red recording light was on, but in the clutter of the counter, it was practically invisible. A few minutes later, I heard the front door open. It was Sarah and Mark, making one of their unscheduled check-ins. I was in the pantry, looking for a tin of cinnamon, so they didn't see me right away. They didn't see the camera, either. They stood in the middle of my kitchen, the heart of my home, and they started talking. Their voices were low, conspiratorial, but the camera's microphone was sensitive. "Did you bring the papers?" Sarah asked, her voice sharp and impatient. "They're in the car," Mark replied. "Are you sure he's going to sign them today? He's been putting it off." "He has to, Mark. The realtor, Mr. Henderson, said the market is peaking. If we want to get the house listed by summer, we need that power of attorney signed now. He said a house this size, on this much land. We're looking at a huge payout, enough to finish our basement and have plenty left over for the Florida condo." My blood ran cold. I froze behind the pantry door, my hand clutching a tin of cinnamon so tightly my knuckles turned white. They weren't just talking about selling my house. They were planning it, actively, with a realtor. Mark's voice was more hesitant. "I don't know, Sarah. He seems fine today. Chloe's here," he was telling her stories. "That's the problem," Sarah hissed. "He has these good days, and then he thinks he's perfectly capable. It's an act. Dr. Evans said it's common. They call it sundowning, even if it happens in the morning. He's a burden, Mark, a financial and emotional drain. This is what's best for everyone. The facility we looked at is top-notch. They have a memory care wing. He'll be safe there. He'll have activities." Activities. The word hung in the air, clinical and chilling. They wanted to put me in a home, sell my house, the one I built for their mother, for them, and use the money to build a home theater in their basement and buy a vacation condo. I felt a wave of nausea so profound I had to grip the doorframe to keep from falling. It wasn't just about the money. It was the casual cruelty, the complete and utter dismissal of my life, my memories, my humanity. I was no longer a person to them. I was a problem to be managed, an asset to be liquidated. I heard Chloe's footsteps on the porch. Sarah and Mark immediately clammed up, their faces rearranging into pleasant, smiling masks as she came back inside. "Oh, hi, sweetie," Sarah chirped. "We just popped in to see Grandpa." I stayed in the pantry for a full minute, my heart hammering against my ribs. I was a coward. I couldn't face them. I couldn't let them see on my face that I had heard every venomous word. I finally shuffled out, pretending I'd been looking for something, and played my part. The part they had written for me. The slightly confused, tired old man. That night, sleep was impossible. The house felt different. The walls seemed to echo with their whispers. Every shadow held a new menace. I sat in my armchair, the one Eleanor had loved, and I felt a despair so heavy it felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. They had won. I was old. I was alone, and they had all the power. I was exactly the burden they said I was. I looked at the picture of Eleanor on the mantelpiece, her smile so full of life, and I whispered, I'm sorry, Ellen. I tried to take care of her. I failed. Chloe came over the next day after school. She looked different. Her usual brightness was gone, replaced by a grim set to her jaw. She didn't even take out her camera. She just sat down at the kitchen table across from me and pushed her laptop towards me. "Grandpa," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "I have to show you something. I'm so sorry." She had reviewed the footage from the day before. She hadn't heard the conversation live, but the camera had. She hit play. I watched the screen, but I didn't need to. I had already heard it, but seeing it, seeing their faces on the screen as their disembodied voices plotted the end of my life, was 1,000 times worse. The camera had captured it all in stark, unforgiving detail. Chloe watched my face as the audio played. She saw the flicker of recognition, the collapse of my carefully constructed composure. She saw the truth dawn on her that I had heard it all from the pantry. Her eyes filled with tears. "Grandpa, I had no idea." When it was over, a profound silence filled the room. The last vestiges of my denial crumbled into dust. It was real. This was my daughter, my only child, and she was planning to discard me like a piece of old broken furniture. A wave of hot white anger, an emotion I hadn't truly felt in decades, surged through me, eclipsing the despair. It was a righteous fury, born of a lifetime of sacrifice being repaid with the ultimate betrayal. I looked at Chloe, at her tear-streaked, horrified face. I saw in her the same integrity, the same fire that had lived in her grandmother, and in that moment a new plan began to form, rising from the ashes of my old life. The despair didn't vanish, but it crystallized. It hardened from a suffocating fog into a cold, sharp diamond of resolve. They thought I was a confused old man. They thought I was a burden. They were about to find out how wrong they were. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. My hand was steady. "Chloe," I said, my voice low and even, "your school project, how ambitious are you feeling? Because I think we need to expand the scope." Chloe's head snapped up, her eyes wide. She saw the change in me, the shift from a broken old man to something else, something she hadn't seen before. A small, defiant smile touched her lips. "Grandpa," she said, wiping her tears away, "I think it just became a feature film." The air in the kitchen, once heavy with despair, was now charged with the electric hum of conspiracy. It was just the two of us against them, a 77-year-old man and a 16-year-old girl with a camera. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt a flicker of something I thought was gone forever. Hope. It wasn't about revenge, I told myself firmly. It was about the truth. But as I looked at the determined set of my granddaughter's jaw, I knew, deep down, that the truth was going to be brutal, and I was going to enjoy every second of its delivery. Our first secret war council was held that very evening. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd signed the papers for the second mortgage, and we laid out our strategy. Chloe was a digital native, her mind a whirlwind of angles, lighting, and narrative structure. "It can't just be a bunch of secret recordings, Grandpa," she explained, her initial shock already transforming into a director's focus. "That's just evidence. For it to be powerful, it has to be a story. It has to have a heart." She was right. We had to show them not just what they were trying to destroy, but the beauty and value of what they were taking for granted. Our film, which we secretly titled The Inheritance, would be a story in 2 acts. Act 1 would be the tribute she had originally envisioned. It would be my life story, built from the warm, loving interviews we'd already filmed. It would be filled with old photographs, shots of the house in the golden light of dawn, close-ups of my gnarled hands working a piece of wood. It would be the story of a man, his love, his family, and the home he built. It would be designed to make them feel proud, to make them feel nostalgic, to lull them into a state of comfortable self-satisfaction. Act 2, she said with a glint in her eye, would be the gut punch. That's where the secret footage would come in, the hushed conversations, the casual cruelty, the financial scheming. We would intercut their ugly words with the beautiful images from Act 1. We'd play the audio of Sarah calling me a burden over a slow motion shot of me pushing her on a swing as a little girl. We'd play Mark's talk of the huge payout from the house sale over a photo of me and Eleanor, young and exhausted but smiling, standing on the empty plot of land. Contrast, Grandpa, Chloe said, her voice filled with a filmmaker's passion. That's what makes it art. That's what makes it hurt. I saw the logic in it immediately. It was brilliant. It was devastating. But I knew we couldn't do it alone. I was playing a part, the frail, forgetful old man, and I needed someone on the outside, someone who could move and act in ways I no longer could. There was only one person I trusted. The next day, Chloe went to a corner store and bought a cheap prepaid burner phone and a handful of cash cards. It felt like something out of a spy movie. She handed it to me with a solemnity that belied her age. No one can know about this, Grandpa. Especially not them. That evening, I locked myself in my workshop, the one place that still felt entirely mine. My hands were shaking slightly as I dialed Arthur's number. He answered on the second ring, his voice a familiar, gravelly boom. "Hello, Arthur? It's me. It's Robert." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Rob? My God, is that really you? I've been calling for months. Sarah always said you were sleeping or unwell. Are you all right, old friend?" The genuine concern in his voice nearly broke me. "I'm all right, or at least I'm about to be. But I need your help. Can you meet me? Somewhere they won't see us." We met the next day at a Greasy Spoon diner halfway across town, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and waitresses who call you on. I hadn't been out of my house on my own, except for supervised doctor's visits, in almost a year. The freedom was intoxicating. When Arthur saw me walk in, his face broke into a wide grin, which quickly faded into a look of concern. "Rob, you look like you've seen a ghost." I sat down, and in a low voice, I told him everything. The isolation, the gaslighting, the unwell narrative, and finally the conversation Chloe's camera had recorded. As I spoke, Arthur's folksy, cheerful demeanor dissolved, replaced by a slow-burning fury. He was a retired accountant, a man who had spent his life making sure numbers added up, and he hated injustice more than anything. That ungrateful. He bit off the word, his fist clenching on the tabletop. "That little girl you gave everything to. And Mark, that spineless weasel. I never liked him." He shook his head. "I knew it. I knew something was wrong. But to sell your house out from under you? To put you in a facility?" He spat the word out like it was poison. "Not on my watch, Rob. Not while I'm still breathing." In that moment, Arthur became more than my friend. He became my general. He immediately switched into accountant mode, his mind sharp and analytical. "Okay, first things first. We need to know exactly where you stand. Do they have power of attorney? Have you signed anything? Anything at all?" I shook my head. "No. Sarah's been pushing a stack of papers at me for weeks. She calls it getting your affairs in order. I kept putting it off. It didn't feel right." Arthur let out a huge sigh of relief. "Thank God for gut feelings. Okay, Rob, that's our firewall. Without that, they're powerless. But we can't assume they won't try something else. Forgery. Claiming you're incompetent. We have to move fast. And we have to move quietly." The next week was a blur of covert operations. Arthur booked me an appointment with a highly recommended elder law attorney, a sharp woman named Miss Albright. I told Sarah I had a routine dental checkup. Mark offered to drive me, but I insisted I'd take a taxi, claiming I didn't want to be a bother. The look of relief on his face that he didn't have to spend 2 hours with the confused old man was both insulting and incredibly useful. Miss Albright listened to my story and the audio from Chloe's camera with a calm, steely professionalism. "Mr. Miller," she said when I was done, "what your daughter and son-in-law are planning is a form of elder abuse, specifically financial exploitation, and their method, isolating you and creating a false narrative of incompetence, is textbook. It's despicable, and we are going to shut it down, completely." Following her precise instructions, we executed a silent coup. First, Arthur and I went to my bank. I revoked all of Sarah's permissions and closed the joint account she had insisted we open for household expenses. I opened a new set of accounts at a different bank, one she didn't even know I used, and had my pension and Social Security direct deposited there. Then, with Miss Albright, I drew up a new will, one that left the house and the bulk of my estate in a trust for Chloe's education and future, to be managed by an independent executor. The final, most important step was creating an ironclad springing power of attorney. It would only activate if 2 independent physicians declared me medically incompetent. I named Arthur my primary agent and Miss Albright as the secondary. Sarah's name was nowhere to be found. While I was securing the legal and financial front, Chloe was on the intelligence-gathering mission. The documentary filming continued, but now with a clandestine purpose. Arthur, who apparently had a hidden passion for spy gadgets, bought her a few new toys online, a pen with a tiny camera, a USB charger that was actually a listening device. Chloe would go over to her parents' house for dinner and leave her charger plugged into the wall in their kitchen or study. The material she gathered was pure gold. It was a horror show. They talked with sickening ease about my future, as if I were a piece of livestock. "The Silver Creek Meadows place has a private room available, but it's an extra $1,000 a month," Sarah said one night, scrolling through her tablet. "But with the money from the house, that's nothing. We could even pay for a year up front to lock it in." "Think of it, Sarah," Mark added, his voice full of avarice. "No more emergency calls, no more wasting our weekends driving over there. We could finally get that ski boat." They complained about me. They complained about my stubbornness, my stories, my very existence. "He asked me about that damn skillet mark on the floor again today," Sarah lamented. "For the 1,000th time, he's living in the past. It's time to move on." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. The story I had shared with Chloe as a symbol of love, Sarah saw as a symptom of my decay. My role in all of this was the hardest. I had to continue playing the part of the man they wanted me to be, docile, confused, and pliable. It was a performance that grated on my very soul. Sarah would hand me the POA papers with a pen. "It's just a formality." I'd squint at the page, sigh, and say, "Oh, Sarah, my reading glasses seem to have walked off again. I can't possibly sign something I can't read." Or I'd pick up the pen and then look up with a sad, vacant expression. "You know, this reminds me of your mother. She had the most beautiful handwriting." I'd drift off into a memory, real or fabricated, until she would snatch the papers away in a huff of frustration. Each time I could feel her patience wearing thinner. Her mask of loving concern was slipping, revealing the ugly, greedy face beneath. And every time Chloe was there, somewhere in the background, her phone angled just right, capturing the venom in her mother's eyes. We were building our case, one soul-crushing performance at a time. The documentary was no longer just a film. It was becoming a legal brief, an emotional indictment, and the instrument of a judgment that was going to be delivered with all the quiet, devastating force of a wrecking ball. The first tremor that signaled the coming earthquake was small. It was a Tuesday morning when my phone rang. It was Sarah, and her voice was tight, strained. "Dad, did you change something with the bank?" I was in my workshop, carefully planing a piece of cherry wood. I set the tool down and adopted my confused persona. "The bank? No, I don't think so. Why do you ask, dear?" "The automatic payment for the phone plan was just declined," she said, an accusatory edge to her voice. "For insufficient funds. That's from our joint account, the one we use for your bills. Is everything all right?" "Oh dear," I said, injecting a note of mild panic into my voice. "That can't be right. There should be plenty in there. The bank must have made one of their computer errors." I'll have to try and call them later. I already called them, she snapped. Her patience gone. They said I'd have to speak to the primary account holder. You. What did you do, Dad? This was it, the first test. I had to hold the line. I took a deep breath. I don't understand, Sarah. That sounds very complicated. You know how I get with all these banking rules. Maybe Mark can figure it out. I was deliberately obtuse, passing the buck, playing the exact role they'd cast me in. I could hear her sputtering with frustration on the other end before she hung up with a clipped, "I'll call you back." The silent takeover was underway. They just didn't know the scale of it yet. They thought it was a clerical error, a moment of senile confusion on my part. They still believed they were in control. That afternoon, their black SUV screeched into my driveway. They didn't knock. They used their key and stormed in, finding me in the living room, calmly reading the newspaper. Chloe, by a stroke of magnificent luck, was already there. She had come straight from school, and her camera was sitting on the mantelpiece, capturing B-roll of the living room, as she put it. It was pointed directly at the front door. "Dad, we need to talk," Sarah began, her arms crossed, her face a thundercloud. Mark stood behind her, looking pale and nervous, a follower to the bitter end. "Of course, dear," I said, folding my newspaper slowly. "Is everything all right? You seem upset." "Don't play dumb with me," she said, her voice rising. "The bank, the phone bill, what is going on?" I looked at her, and for a fleeting moment I wanted to drop the act. I wanted to stand up and tell her that I knew everything, that I had heard her plotting in my kitchen, that she was a disgrace to her mother's memory. But I held my tongue. That wasn't the plan. The plan was a public execution, not a private squabble. Miss Albright's words echoed in my mind. Let them expose themselves. The more they push, the more rope they give you to hang them with. So I gave them the rope. "I've just been tidying things up," I said, my voice soft and reasonable. "My friend Arthur was helping me. He's very good with numbers. He said it's important for a man my age to have his finances organized and simplified. He set me up with a new system. It's all very efficient." The mention of Arthur was like throwing gasoline on a fire. Sarah's face went from angry to incandescent with rage. "Arthur? You let Arthur meddles in our family business. Dad, he is putting ideas in your head. He's a lonely old man trying to cause trouble. You can't trust him." The hypocrisy was so staggering it was almost comical. She was accusing Arthur of doing the exact thing she and her husband had been doing for a year. The camera on the mantelpiece recorded every word, every gesture, every flicker of her unrestrained, entitled fury. Mark finally found his voice, trying for a calming, reasonable tone that just sounded weak. "Robert, what Sarah means is we're your family. We are the ones who should be helping you with these things. We're just worried that Arthur doesn't have your best interests at heart." "Oh, I don't know," I said, looking from his face to Sarah's. "He seemed very concerned with my best interests. In fact, he was the one who explained what a power of attorney really means. It's a very powerful document, isn't it? You're putting all of your trust in one person." I let that sentence hang in the air. I saw a flicker of panic in Sarah's eyes. Did I know? How much did I know? "That's why it needs to be family," she insisted. "Well, I've taken care of it," I said calmly. "I had a lawyer draw up all the proper papers. A very nice woman named Miss Albright. It's all settled. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think it's time for my nap. All this talk of money is very tiring." I stood up, shuffled past them, and went to my bedroom, closing the door behind me. I leaned against it, my heart pounding not with fear but with a wild, exhilarating surge of adrenaline. I could hear their frantic, furious whispers from the living room. They were completely baffled. The docile, confused old man had suddenly developed a spine of steel and a team of professional advisors. Their carefully constructed plan was hitting a wall, and they had no idea how it had been built. Chloe, my brilliant, brave granddaughter, told me later that she kept the camera rolling for another 10 minutes after I left the room. It captured Sarah pacing back and forth, her hands pulling at her hair while Mark wrung his hands. A lawyer? Where did he find a lawyer? And Arthur, I'm going to kill him, she seethed. This has to be his doing. Dad isn't capable of this on his own. That was their fatal flaw, the blind spot in their greedy worldview. They had so thoroughly convinced themselves of my incompetence that they couldn't entertain the possibility that I was the one pulling the strings. They needed a villain, another person to blame, because the alternative, that the father they had written off as a senile relic had outmaneuvered them at every turn, was simply unthinkable. The takeover was nearly complete. All that was left was to set the stage for the final act. The power had shifted. It was no longer a loud, demanding force radiating from my daughter, but a quiet, unmovable presence emanating from me. It was the power of silence, of secrets, of knowing the truth while your enemies operate in a fog of their own making. They could feel the ground shifting beneath their feet, but they couldn't see the chasm that was about to open up. A week after the confrontation in my living room, Chloe sent out the invitations. She had designed them herself on her computer. They were elegant, printed on heavy cardstock, with a simple, tasteful font. They looked professional, official. The evite that followed had a subject line that read, "You are cordially invited to a private family premiere." The invitation itself was a masterpiece of bait and switch. In celebration of a life of dedication, love, and craftsmanship, it read, "Chloe Vance is proud to present the premiere screening of her documentary film, A Life in Wood and Stone, The Roberts Story. Please join us for a private viewing to honor our beloved father, grandfather, and friend." She sent it to Sarah and Mark, of course, but she also sent it to a carefully curated list of other family members. She sent one to Mark's parents, David and Eleanor, a cruel irony that his mother shared my wife's name, a proud, status-conscious couple who adored Sarah and believed her to be the perfect doting daughter. She sent another to my sister-in-law, Eleanor's sister, Aunt Carol, a woman with a tongue as sharp as a chisel and a low tolerance for nonsense. And finally, she sent one to a few of Sarah and Mark's closest friends, the ones they were always trying to impress with their new car and their talk of vacation homes. The reaction was exactly what we'd hoped for. Sarah called me, her voice once again dripping with that fake sugary sweetness. "Dad, we got Chloe's invitation. It's just the most wonderful thing. A whole movie about you. We're so proud of her. And so touched that she sees what a special man you are." I played along, my voice full of paternal pride.
"She's a good girl, that Chloe."
"Very talented. We've already called David and Eleanor," Sarah gushed. "They are just thrilled. They said it's so rare to see a teenager show such respect for her elders these days. We're all going to come. It will be a real family celebration. A family celebration." The irony was so thick, I could have cut it with a handsaw. They were walking into their own execution, and not only were they oblivious, they were actively bragging about it. They saw the screening as a vindication of their own narrative. "Look how wonderful we are, raising such a devoted daughter who honors her ailing grandfather." They saw it as a social triumph, a chance to perform their roles as loving family in front of an audience. In the days leading up to the screening, however, their financial panic continued to escalate. The declined phone payment was just the beginning. The credit card they had, a secondary card on my main account which they used for emergencies like expensive dinners and online shopping sprees, was suddenly canceled. They were being financially untethered from me, and the reality of their own economic fragility was beginning to set in. They tried a new tactic, love bombing. Flowers arrived at my door. Mark dropped off a new, expensive-looking cashmere sweater. Sarah started calling 3 times a day, not to check on me, but with a desperate, pleading edge to her voice. "Dad, I've been thinking, and I am so sorry if we've been a little overbearing lately. We just love you so much. And about those papers, let's just forget about them for now.
The most important thing is that you're happy and comfortable."
Why don't Mark and I take you out to that fancy steakhouse you like this weekend? It was a desperate, transparent countermove. They were trying to claw back the control they had lost, using affection as another tool of manipulation. It was disgusting. Chloe, ever the documentarian, even managed to record one of their strategy sessions when she left her phone charging in their living room. "It's not working," Mark whined. "He's being polite, but it's like there's a wall there. He just keeps saying, 'That's so thoughtful, but I have plans.'" What plans could he possibly have? "It's Arthur," Sarah hissed. "He's turned him against us. We have to do something more drastic. Maybe we should just call Dr. Evans and tell him Dad's having a full-blown psychotic episode. We could get an emergency conservatorship." "Based on what?" Mark countered, a rare moment of clarity for him. "He's got his own lawyer now. He's managing his own finances. We'd look like greedy, hysterical children. No, we have to play the long game. We'll go to this stupid movie premiere. We'll be the perfect supportive family, and we will win him back over. We just have to get him away from Arthur." They believed they were playing the long game. They had no idea the game was already over. I held firm, politely deflecting all their attempts at reconciliation. My response to every probing question, every desperate offer, was the same calm, simple phrase: "We can talk about everything at the screening. Chloe's film explains it all." That sentence became my shield and my sword. It was beautifully ambiguous. To them, it sounded like a confirmation that the film was a tribute, a loving explanation of our family's bond. But the line was a threat, a ticking time bomb planted in their minds. It unnerved them. "Explains it all." What, exactly, would it explain? They couldn't ask for details without revealing their own guilty consciences. They were trapped by their own duplicity. The power shift was total and absolute. I was no longer the subject of their narrative. I was the author of it, and they were about to be read to filth. The night of the screening felt like the air before a thunderstorm, heavy, charged, and unnervingly still. We had rented a small, private screening room at an independent cinema downtown. It was the kind of place with plush velvet seats and a sense of old-fashioned dignity. Chloe was there early, checking the projector, her face pale but resolute. Arthur arrived shortly after, looking dapper in a sports coat, and gave my shoulder a firm squeeze. "Ready for the show, Rob?" he asked, a grim smile on his face. I just nodded. I was beyond nervous. I was in a state of strange, crystalline calm. The guests began to arrive. Mark's parents, David and Eleanor, swept in, all smiles and expensive cologne, kissing Sarah on both cheeks. "Sarah, darling, you must be so proud. This is just marvelous." Aunt Carol arrived, her sharp eyes already scanning the room, missing nothing. A few of Sarah and Mark's friends, a couple named Todd and Lisa, came in, laughing and joking. Finally, Sarah and Mark made their entrance. Sarah was wearing a bright red dress, a victory color. She was performing the role of the proud mother and devoted daughter to the hilt. She rushed over to me and gave me a theatrical hug. "Oh, Dad, I can't wait to see it. I brought tissues," she whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. The irony was so potent it almost made me laugh. I had arranged the seating. I had Sarah and Mark in the center of the front row. Their friends and family were seated directly behind them, giving them a perfect view of both the screen and the back of my daughter's head. I sat in the back row next to Arthur. I wanted to watch them watch the film. Chloe, my brilliant director, stood by the projection equipment at the back, giving me a small, determined nod. She hit a button. The lights went down. The film began. Act 1. A life in wood and stone was everything they expected and more. It was beautiful. Chloe had woven together the old photos, the interviews, and stunning atmospheric shots of the house and my workshop into a moving tapestry of my life. It opened with my voice, speaking over a slow pan of my worn tools. "A piece of wood has a story," I said. "You just have to be patient enough to listen to it." I saw Sarah dab her eye with a tissue. I saw Mark put his arm around her. David and Eleanor were beaming with pride. They were all completely enthralled. caught in the warm, nostalgic glow of the story. The film moved through my courtship with my Eleanor, our wedding, the birth of Sarah. It showed her as a little girl, all pigtails and smiles, helping me in the workshop. It showed the day we gave her the keys to her first car. It culminated with a touching tribute to my Eleanor, ending on a photo of the two of us, older, silver-haired, but still holding hands, sitting on the porch of the house we built. The screen faded to black. There was a moment of reverent silence in the theater. Then a new title card appeared on the screen in stark white letters against the black. It read, Act 2, The Inheritance. A low, unsettling hum filled the speakers. The screen remained black, and then a voice filled the theater, clear and cold. It was Sarah's voice, from that day in the kitchen. The sooner we get the power of attorney sorted, the better. I watched the back of Sarah's head. She flinched, as if she'd been struck. Mark's arm, which had been resting lovingly on her shoulder, dropped like a stone. From the row behind them I heard a sharp intake of breath from Aunt Carol. The film continued. It was a brutal, relentless assault. Chloe played Mark's voice, talking about the huge payout from the house sale over beautiful sun-drenched footage of my rose garden. She showed the brochures for the Silver Creek Meadows facility, their slick, corporate promises of dignified care, and then immediately cut to the secret recording of Sarah calling me a financial and emotional drain. The whiplash was visceral. The audience was silent, frozen. Sarah and Mark were rigid in their seats, staring at the screen in utter horror. Their friends and family behind them were shifting uncomfortably, leaning forward, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning disgust. The climax of the film was the footage from my living room, the day they had stormed in to confront me about the bank account. The camera, positioned on the mantelpiece, had captured the scene perfectly. It showed Sarah's face, twisted in rage as she yelled, "He's putting ideas in your head. You can't trust him." It showed Mark's weak, placating gestures, and it showed me, a frail-looking old man, calmly telling them I had a lawyer. The final devastating sequence was a montage, a rapid-fire collection of their most damning statements, their greed, their lies, their disrespect, all culminating in Sarah's whining voice from a recording. "He's living in the past. It's time to move on." The screen cut to black, and then one final image appeared. It was a slow, steady, high-definition close-up of a single document, my new notarized, ironclad power of attorney. The camera zoomed in on the signature line for the primary agent. The name was perfectly clear, Arthur Metal. The film held on that image for 10 long seconds, and then the credits rolled in absolute, deafening silence. The house lights came up slowly, revealing the carnage. The atmosphere in the room was thick with shock and shame. Sarah and Mark sat motionless, their faces ashen. They looked like statues. The people behind them, their family and friends, were staring, not at the screen anymore, but directly at them. The looks on their faces were not of sympathy, but of pure, unadulterated contempt. David, Mark's father, was the first to move. He stood up, his face a mask of cold fury. He didn't even look at his son. "You," he said, his voice trembling with rage. "You did this to him? After everything he's done for you?" Sarah finally broke. She turned around in her seat, her face streaked with tears, a desperate, wild look in her eyes. It's not what it looks like. It's all taken out of context. He's confused. Chloe, tell them how confused Grandpa gets." Chloe, my fierce, brave granddaughter, hadn't moved from her post by the projector. She was holding a small handheld camera, and the little red light was on. She was filming the aftermath for the director's cut. I decided it was time for me to speak. I stood up from the back row, and my voice, when it came, was not the weak, wavering voice of a confused old man. It was clear, steady, and filled the silent room. "No, Sarah," I said, looking directly at her. "I'm not confused. For the first time in a very long time, everything is perfectly clear. I let my gaze sweep over the rest of the room, over the shocked faces of our family. You wanted a tribute. You wanted a celebration of family. Well, this was it. This was the truth. This was your legacy. I looked at Arthur, and he nodded. Without another word, we turned and walked out of the screening room, leaving them all behind in the wreckage. As the door swung shut behind me, I heard the first shouts. It was Aunt Carol, and she sounded furious. The family celebration had begun. The aftermath was exactly what you'd expect when you light a match in a room full of gasoline. The family didn't just crack, it imploded. Arthur told me later that Aunt Carol laid into Sarah with a righteous fury that would have made a drill sergeant blush. Mark's parents, David and Eleanor, were mortified beyond words. They were people who cared deeply about appearances, about their reputation in their community, and their son and daughter-in-law had just been exposed as cruel, greedy, and monstrous. They left the screening room without saying a word to Mark and Sarah. The next day, Arthur got a call from David. He apologized profusely for his son's behavior and assured Arthur that he and his wife were cutting all ties, financial and social, with them until they made things right, which, David acknowledged, was probably impossible. The friends, Todd and Lisa, apparently slipped out during the chaos, and according to Chloe, have not answered a single text from her mother since. Sarah and Mark were left adrift, isolated in a way they had tried to isolate me, but their isolation wasn't built on lies. It was built on the cold, hard foundation of their own character. The social standing they prized so highly evaporated overnight. The whispers in their affluent suburban neighborhood were no longer about their new SUV, but about the terrible thing they tried to do to Sarah's poor old father. Without my financial backing, their carefully curated lifestyle began to crumble. They couldn't afford the mortgage on their oversized house, the payments on their 2 luxury cars, or the tuition for Chloe's private school, without the quiet, steady infusion of cash they had been siphoning from me for years. 6 months after the screening, a for sale sign went up on their lawn. They had to downsize, significantly. The Florida condo and the ski boat they'd been dreaming of, the rewards for disposing of me, remained just that, a greedy fantasy. The karma was swift, and it was brutal. As for me, my life began again. The silence in my house was no longer a heavy, sorrowful presence. It was peaceful. The echoes of my Eleanor were still there, but they were comforting, not haunting. Arthur and I started having breakfast at that greasy spoon diner every Tuesday. We'd talk for hours about everything and nothing. My old friends, hearing from Arthur that the reports of my decline had been greatly exaggerated, started calling again. My house, once a prison, became a home again, filled with laughter and conversation. My relationship with Chloe transformed into the most precious thing in my life. The documentary, which she titled simply The Inheritance, won a National Student Filmmaking Award. She used the prize money to open a college fund. She's decided she wants to be a journalist, to tell the stories of people whose voices have been silenced. She still has very limited contact with her parents. They've tried to apologize, but their apologies are always tinged with self-pity and blame. We just weren't thinking clearly, Sarah told her. We were under so much stress. They still don't understand that their crime wasn't a lapse in judgment. It was a failure of love, a failure of basic human decency. Chloe sees that. She has her grandmother's clarity. So now, here I am. I'm still Robert. I'm still 77. But I'm not a burden. I'm not a ghost. I'm a man who, with the help of a brave young woman and a loyal old friend, took back his own story. The world is full of people who will try to write your ending for you, who will try to shrink you down to fit their own narrative. They'll use your age, your kindness, your quiet nature against you. They will mistake your patience for weakness and your generosity for an open invitation to take whatever they want. It was never really about the money or the house. Those are just things. It was about respect. It was about dignity. It was about being seen as a human being, with a life and a history and a future, not as a line item on a balance sheet. The revenge, if you want to call it that, was not in their downfall. The revenge was in my survival. It was in the simple, quiet joy of waking up in my own bed, in the home I built, and knowing that I am the master of my own days. It was in proving that an old dog doesn't just have a few tricks left. Sometimes, he's the one holding the leash. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever been in a situation where you felt overlooked, underestimated, or taken for granted, I want you to know that you are not alone. There is a strength inside you that you might not even recognize until you're forced to use it. Please, if this story meant something to you, give it a like. It helps more than you know, and I encourage you to subscribe for more stories like this one. Most importantly, share your own experiences in the comments below. Reading them helps all of us feel a little less alone in this complicated world. Remember to be kind, but also remember to be strong. No one else will fight for your dignity if you're not willing to fight for it yourself.